consulting experts. He's also one of the most experienced pilots in the world. He has over 60 years and 34,000 hours of worldwide heavy jet experience. Welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today, Captain Ross Rusty Aimer. Well, let me begin by asking you what your assessment is of the cause of this disaster after you have studied and read the preliminary report released.
I'm very careful in commenting on a case which is not completely resolved yet. As you know, we only have a prelim report, although this is much better than prior to the prelim report. That there was, as you know, there was incredible amount of misinformation on YouTube. All these so-called experts on YouTube, they have these crazy ideas about the cause of this crash, and they were sticking with it. At least this prelim report tells us, for example, some of those assessments were completely wrong. And as you know, they are focusing on this fuel cutoff switches. There are three theories that I can think of, but again, I'm going to wait till the report is completely done, where they definitely, because they leave some questions unanswered. For example, 3 seconds past liftoff at 180 knots, the two cutoff switches are placed one by one, first number one, then number two, into cutoff. Now, at first glance, it is impossible for those switches to move on their own. It's absolutely impossible. The design of these switches are that to prevent any problems like bumping the switch accidentally, you cannot bump those switches and turn them off. So either someone had deliberately turned those switches to cut off, or they were doing what we call a memory item from a checklist that is for dual engine failure. That's on the, it's two items on this checklist. It's memory item for every pilot that flies a 787. And it says fuel cutoff switches to off and back on, and activate the RAT switch for 1 second. So I'm thinking they're either responding to a dual engine failure, which they're doing the correct procedure, or those switches possibly, it's a mechanical switch. Anything mechanical is possible to a failure. It's possible that those switches vibrated themselves off. Now that's one in a probably a billion chance. But somewhere in that report, in the 15-page report, if you read the report, it mentions there was apparently must have been a case for FAA to issue a warning to the airlines. Not a warning, but a mention that this could possibly happen. But it was not a mandatory, therefore Air India did not follow that. So if those switches are loose for any reason, the spring is not working or spring is broken, there is always a possibility that those switches may have vibrated themselves into the off position. Because the other thing is that the non-flying pilot, in my opinion, who was the captain, was not flying. He was handling the radio at that time. The co-pilot has both of his hands on a control wheel as they rotate. He's not touching those switches. So it must have been either the captain turning off those switches and turning them back on, or they vibrated off. Those are the two cases. And that's why we hear in the report someone saying, why did you turn off the fuel control switches? And I suspect that it was the non-flying pilot who was the co-pilot asking the captain, "Why did you do that?" And he responds, "I didn't do it." So that's very unusual. Either he did it or he did not. Why would he lie? And that's why I'm thinking we need to pay attention to every possibility, including a possibility of those switches failing on their own. Now, you may ask, how could it possibly these switches fail on their own and drop off? Some of the pilots of my era, my age group, we were kind of anal or very precise, if you might put it in a better way. We wanted to do everything perfectly. In other words, if the ATC told us 250 knots, we flew 250 knots, not 251, not 249. If they said heading 090, it was not 089 or 091. It was exactly precisely. And the same thing goes, and I'm guilty of it myself. When I started my takeoff roll, I would stick to the center line of the runway so much that those, we call them centerline lighting. It's a kind of a turtle shape stainless steel housing with two lights on each end. And it's slightly protrudes over the concrete of the runway. But your nose wheel, if it's right on the center line, you hear the bump. First starts with bump, 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 bump as you increase your speed. But in my mind, I'm saying to myself, I'm on the center line. And that's one of the things that pilots of my generations really wanted to do that. And you might call it, like I said, anal, being anal, and you want to do everything perfectly. So that vibration, I'm thinking, if there's a possibility of those switches being loose, that vibration might have turned off those switches on its own, which is, again, I think it's a 1 in a billion probability that both of those switches vibrate themselves into off position. But I suspect the investigators would look into every single possibility. And I want them to do that because we owe it to everybody that lost their life, especially those pilots. They're dead. They're not here to defend themselves. So we must. And I go further, I would ask every 787 pilot in the world, tomorrow when you get into that cockpit, when you're sitting on the gate, or if you're in a simulator, touch those switches. You don't have to turn them off or turn it on. Make sure that spring is firm. And if you feel that spring is loose, write it up, call the maintenance right away. Because again, if there's that slight chance, we need to know that right away.
And for those, blaming the pilot already, why would a captain with 15,000 hours of experience put the fuel switch off right after takeoff? Is it possible to do so 3 seconds after takeoff for both the engines?
It's beyond my comprehension. You're absolutely correct. At that moment, even if your engines both fail, you still have a little bit of power to get up higher. Because to turn that switch at that moment, 3 seconds after liftoff, is suicide. And one thing else I'm sure the investigators will look into is a possible, I hate to say the word, possible pilot suicide. I don't like to speculate, but investigators will look into everything, including a pilot suicide. And I definitely hate to say that word, but as a longtime pilot and sometime investigator, I would definitely look into just every possible thing.
Now, Captain Ross, does the fact that the FAA raised the issue against the fuel switch in 2018 show that there could be a technical glitch, a technical issue?
I must correct myself. That was not a warning issued by FAA. That was an advisory circular. It's called advisory. And it doesn't have much of a weight. It's voluntarily. In other words, they send it out to all 787 operators at that time. This was in December of 2018, I believe, that advisory circular came out. And because it was not mandatory, we have two types of advisories. There are ADs that you must comply with immediately or within a certain period of time. This was an advisory issue. You didn't have to do it if you didn't want to, but they just advised the operators. So this, I believe Air India did not pay any attention to it because it was not a mandatory thing. It would have been probably just go there and jiggle those switches, make sure they're firm. Because when they work normally, it's impossible to bump them. You have to lift the switch over a cam and drop it down. So it's impossible for it to come loose. But if that spring is broken, as I mentioned, or loose, there could be a possibility. That's why I'm saying that's why they issued, there must have been a case or two that for FAA to come out and say that. So that, and the fact that the investigators, AAIB and TSB, they all agreed to put that in the report. That's an important issue. I hope that they would look into everything.
Okay. Now, what part of further investigation, let me ask you, would be key in clarifying what led to the control switches being turned off? As you're saying, the investigators need to go into everything, and they should. They owe it to the families. What should be then the follow-up to this preliminary report on this aspect emerging of the switches, the fuel switches?
787, like most modern jet, has an incredible amount of information going to the flight data recorder. So, unfortunately for all of us, both flight and data recorders were recovered, and they were able to extract all the information from them. So the position of those switches and when and how it was, it's in that data. You have the voice recorder that records both pilots and other switches, any sound in the cockpit. They could go back and really concentrate on when those switches clicked. You could hear that in the voice. And one last thing that I like to add is that in the United States, because of the strong unions, we were able to add a third pilot for any flight over 8 hours. Any flight over 8 hours, two-man crew, it must be three. Now you have an extra pilot. And this flight was, as you know, almost 10 hours. And unfortunately, Air India is still operating it under the two-man crew. So it was if there was a third pilot in that cockpit, he or she may have saved the day because they're looking at both of these pilots and see what they're doing. And he or she would have said, before they touch that, what are you doing at this altitude? It's too early. 3 seconds past rotation, you turn off those switches. Might as well committed suicide because there's no way in hell you can relight those engines in that short of a time and in that altitude, in that airspeed. So that's another extremely important thing that the investigators will look into. Yes, it's a part of the checklist, as I mentioned, memory item, in case you lose both engines. But do you need to do that fast, that quickly, before even raising the gear? Because once you turn off those switches, that's another thing. You can't raise the gear anymore. All of these things will be hopefully investigated by, I'm sure, competent people. They will interview other pilots that know these gentlemen, their families. They go into their history. What was their religious beliefs? What was their political views? All of these things will be investigated, I hope.
Okay, let me also then quickly ask you about, would you expect the final comprehensive report into this crash soon? And after this preliminary report, how long more before that final report comes out with some sort of final conclusion as well on what led to this crash?
You know, ICAO has a rule, and Air India followed it, that says you have to come out within 30 days with a preliminary report. So that preliminary, as the word says, it's just a loosely investigated, quick, basically an answer. But if they want to do a real investigation, like I mentioned, to look into just about everything, it may take as much as 2 or 3 years. You know, there's really no time limit on doing a good investigation. We want them to take time to do it perfectly, to do a correct investigation. So that may take a while. Now, it all depends, because we're fortunate enough that Indian government has allowed NTSB, Boeing, General Electric, and even ICAO to be involved in this. I like that. I like that these fellas will check each other and make sure nobody has any way to insert their own opinion for any reason. So it has to be scientific, completely scientific and fair and balanced, and they do the job to the best of their knowledge. And therefore, it may take a while.
Yes. Do you think there's any way of ensuring something like this does not happen again? That fuel engine switches don't go off at such low altitudes, Captain?
You know, I used to say, and this is not my saying, it's in aviation from years ago, every procedure, every law, every rule in aviation is written in blood. In other words, somebody at some point made that mistake, and we learned about it, and now that mistake is in the books, so nobody else will make that error again. So I'm hoping that by finding out exactly what happened with this, there won't be a future occurrence of these fuel switches possibly turning themselves off, or an electronic signal in the engine control EECs, engine control computers, could have possibly done it too. So we don't know that. None of these things will be known until the entire investigation is done. The only good thing about this, as I mentioned earlier, about this pre-RIM report, is that all these other crazies are hopefully go away with their theories. You know, it was either flap was not in position or fuel was contaminated. The report says precisely that wasn't the case. Fuel was okay. Temperature was hot, but that's normal for that takeoff. That's not a problem. Aircraft was not overweight. There was no rain shower. The weather was fine on takeoff. All of those theories on YouTube are disregarded, hopefully. But again, this report did not solve all the problems. In fact, it started a new thing, that how did those switches go off? That's the million-dollar question. And I don't know the answer.
Indeed, none of us do, sir. And $1 million question
No.
is exactly the way to put it.
Nobody knows yet, and that's why we
Absolutely.
have to
Now,
be
let me
patient.
quickly ask you, Captain, about the 737s. Those 737s, of course, also have faced several quality issues, even being grounded as well. What is your assessment of these aircraft, the 787s? Does this incident affect the credibility of that aircraft as well going forward?
Short answer, yes. Because 787, just like any other new airplane, has what we call teething problems. Any new airplane that has come out, Airbus, Boeing, even my old original airplane, the 707, initially they had some issues. If you remember with 787, they had the battery fire immediately after it was introduced, and they grounded the airplane. And there was also strong rumors from whistleblowers at Boeing, as you know, that some of the 787s were put together very poorly, especially the one that came out of the South Carolina plant. It's a non-union plant. There were some inexperienced people putting the airplane back in, and they discovered some issues in some of those airplanes, like with the pressure bulkhead or forcing two units together. These are the things that shouldn't happen in an airplane like 787. So to go back to what you asked, I think there are some issues with 787. On the other hand, this was the only crash from almost 1,200 airplanes, and they've been flying for a long time. So it has a very good safety record in that respect. But by no means I'm giving a pass to Boeing. So they're under scrutiny also. And I hope, again, that investigators even look further into 787 itself.
All right, Captain Rusty Amer, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that big story. Let's slip into a short break on that note. We're back on the other side with lots more.
दीप्ति अरोरा जी सिर्फ 38 साल की उम्र में एक बीमारी से चली गई। उनके टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस के पैसे उनके बच्चे की पढ़ाई में काम आ सकते हैं। पॉलिसी बाजार ने क्लेम के वक्त फैमिली का पूरा साथ दिया। पॉलिसी बाजार पे 2 करोड़ का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 700 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
Uttar Pradesh government's Project Alankar has emerged as a standout example of effective educational reform. Launched by Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath in October 2021, the scheme has transformed infrastructure and learning environment in state-run schools.
यूपी शिक्षा का एक नया मॉडल देने जा रहा है स्कूली शिक्षा का, प्री प्राइमरी से लेकर के और सीनियर सेकेंडरी लेवल तक।
The project seeks to achieve 100% compliance with 35 infrastructure and facility benchmarks in 2,441 government schools. Under this initiative, schools are being equipped with smart classrooms, science laboratories, libraries, computer labs, and hygienic toilets. This has created a conducive and inclusive environment for learning. Enrollment in secondary schools has increased by 23% and attendance in primary schools has risen 11.5%. The turnaround witnessed in government-run schools in UP has made this ambitious scheme a role model for other states across India. Under the leadership of Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, Uttar Pradesh is playing an important role in making India self-reliant. Gautam Budh Nagar is shaping up to become a global semiconductor hub.
आज उत्तर प्रदेश डाटा सेंटर के एक बड़े हब के रूप में स्थापित हुआ है।
India's 6th semiconductor plant is going to be built on 48 acres of land in Noida. A chip manufacturing unit is being set up with an investment of rupees 3,700 crores. This plant will manufacture display driver chips for mobile phones, laptops, cars, PCs, medical equipment and a myriad of other devices. 20,000 wafers and 36 million units will be produced per month. The plant is expected to create more than 4,000 direct jobs. Hospitality, transport and service industries will benefit at the local level. As India moves forward in its journey to develop this strategically vital industry, Uttar Pradesh is emerging as a future semiconductor hub.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया NewsX का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
नितेश श्रीवास्तव जी सिर्फ 35 साल की उम्र में अचानक एक बीमारी से चले गए। उनकी टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस के पैसे बच्चों की पढ़ाई और घर खर्च में काम आ सकते हैं। पॉलिसी बाजार ने क्लेम के वक्त फैमिली का पूरा साथ दिया। पॉलिसी बाजार पे 2 करोड़ का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 700 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
The Uttar Pradesh government, led by Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, is powering the future by creating thousands of new jobs for our youth. By providing government jobs and supporting self-employment ventures, it is making sure that every young dream finds a path to success.
पारदर्शी भर्ती ने उत्तर प्रदेश के नौजवान को उत्तर प्रदेश के विकास के लिए समर्पित कर दिया है।
In the past 8 years, 8.5 lakh young adults secured government jobs. Of this, 95,000 jobs were provided by the UP Public Service Commission and 2,16,000 new appointments were made in the police department. Entrepreneurs are being provided interest-free loans to the tune of 5 lakh rupees. Infrastructure support and innovative skill development programs have resulted in 2 crore jobs across 96 lakh MSME units. The Yogi Adityanath-led government is scripting new success stories and realizing the vision of a developed India.
Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we are looking at a very important issue. In fact, we've been seeing the increasing number of heart attacks or, health issues leading to sudden death in people who are quite young. Heart attacks is something we associate with a much older group. But people in the age group of, say, the late 20s, early 30s to the 50s have also of late been suffering from heart attacks. Is it something because of the lifestyles we lead, the stress, the tension? Some people are attributing it to the post-COVID vaccine complications. Or is it something else? That and other lifestyle issues that, we've seen that, in the earlier days, whatever the deal was, there was some kind of, the stress or these kind of incidents of health was not so much. So how cautious should today's youth be? How much, should we do our executive checkups, for instance? What are the tips and preventives that one should go in for? I have to answer these questions, a very panel of highly experienced doctors. Joining me on the show is Dr. Romel Tikku. He's the Director, Internal Medicine at Max Healthcare. Dr. Harsh Mahajan, he's the one person who knows exactly what's going on in town. Everybody goes to him. He's the founder and chairman at Mahajan Imaging, and he's also the chief radiologist. I have Dr. Pradeep Katra. He is an MD in internal medicine and also runs his own hypertension clinic. And Dr. P.S. Venkateshwar Rao. He is endocrine, breast, and laparoscopic surgeon. He's a consultant in Bangalore. Dr. Tikku, tell us what is happening on ground and how serious are these issues? Are these cases of heart attacks? But heart attacks are usually, they lead up, something leads to a heart attack. So what should we be worried about and look out for?
Well, there has been an increase in heart issues, and it's a concerning global trend all over, not only in India, all over the world. And there are multiple factors for it: traditional risk factors, lifestyle changes, stress, etc. If we talk about lifestyle, then poor eating, faulty habits, too much of saturated fat, too much of sugar, sugary drinks, junk food, lack of fiber in diet, physical inactivity, sedentary lifestyle, not going for a walk, obesity, being overweight, your BMI more than 25, and too much of indulgence in alcohol, smoking, vaping, hookah, it's become a trend now. And then you talk about stress, anxiety, depression, leads to binge eating, lots of other issues, insomnia. These all can trigger heart events. And also the fact that you have a lot of stress these days of job insecurity, work pressure, family demands, and things like that. And then the health issues, undiagnosed health issues or uncontrolled health issues. You might be a diabetic for all you don't even know you have it. Uncontrolled sugar, uncontrolled blood pressure, it doesn't give you any symptoms. Very high cholesterol, LDL levels, polycystic ovaries, insulin resistance. There are so many factors. And see, Indians are again genetically predisposed to health issues, South Asians for that matter. And if you have a family history of heart disease, and then the lifestyle also, substance abuse, lots of parties where you consume cocaine and things like that, they can trigger heart issues. And now people, young generation, which goes to the gym, has this habit of taking too many fat burners, supplements without medical supervision, anabolic steroids. I mean, everything can lead to heart events. It's not one size fits all. And again, if we talk about COVID and COVID vaccines, if you ask me, COVID vaccines have actually prevented heart issues because they've prevented COVID in so many crores of people in our country. But if you talk about COVID, it predisposes you. It's a hypercoagulable state. It can lead to stroke, myocardial infarction, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, and the likes, myocarditis, heart issues, and a lot of inflammation. You've seen up to even, there are studies which say up to even 1 year, you can have heart issues post-COVID and then long COVID. And I would say it's a host of issues, everything put together. We always say that COVID vaccine or a particular thing is, but each person is different. We have to go by the history, their lifestyle choices. There's so many factors to it.
Now, Mahajan, you're also on the board of a lot of, policy and government think tanks. I want you to specifically address the COVID vaccine issue. Dr. Tikku has talked about it, and other reasons that you feel is leading to these sudden deaths in one so young.
Priya, I think Dr. Tikku has put things in absolutely the correct perspective. Heart disease is due to multiple factors. We've known it for years. And, that is something that is being reiterated. Lifestyle choices, of course, genetics plays a role. And on top of that is this disease, that terrible disease that we encountered. And, as Dr. Quatra was just telling, and we know that ICMR did a study in our country, and ICMR is a highly respected research institution. And they could not see any cause and effect relationship specifically with COVID vaccines given in our country and increase incidence of heart disease. Having said that, there is a 2022 study which was published in and where 46 studies were included, which looked at the incidence of heart disease, risk factors, short-term course, and long-term outcomes. And this was done from a group in Canada where they looked at the mRNA vaccines, you know, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, which were given predominantly in the western part of the world, the US and Canada. And there they did find that there was increased incidence of heart disease in those who got mRNA vaccines, especially the young and adolescents, the young adults and in adolescents. However, we have not seen that kind of thing with the different category of vaccines that we obtained here. Now, as Dr. Tiku said, heart disease is increasing. It is multifactorial. And only this week, we have an article in JAMA Open Network. This is the Journal of the American Medical Association, where again, this is published from Karolinska Institute, a highly respected organization from Sweden, where they find that on MRI, something which I do, and we did a lot during COVID and post-COVID in our country, they found that there were left heart issues. You know, left heart is where the pumping actually happens. Dysfunction of the left side of the heart, the left ventricle, as well as microvascular changes, meaning that blood supply to the muscle of the heart itself did get compromised with COVID, not with COVID vaccine. And this is a double-blind kind of study that they did, published only this week. So COVID did cause and continues to cause changes in the heart, which can lead to increased heart disease, increased heart attacks. Whereas the ICMR study done in our country about vaccines shows that there is no increased incidence. Of course, any vaccine, and so many vaccines children receive on a regular basis, we've received them. There is that, minuscule minority who may get a side effect. But as far as heart disease goes, the mRNA vaccines shown to be some increase, that too very minor, but some increase, but not the vaccines that we received.
Okay, that's at least reassuring. Dr. Katra, you also were telling us about the study, ICMR study, but the impact of COVID early on, we were thinking is more on the lungs, but now there has been some impact on the heart also. That's what it seems to be. Your reaction to that and the reasons why the increase. What do you feel why the heart attacks increasing in the young?
No, on the whole, means heart attack in Indian population, we otherwise also get coronary artery disease 10 years earlier as compared to Caucasian or other population. So first, we are more prone to both diabetes and coronary artery disease, and we get early. And so the complications are, and in most of the cases, in sudden cardiac death, in 60 to 70% cause is underlying coronary artery disease. Only in 20 to 30% patients, we are not able to diagnose or establish a real cause for heart attack. Or sudden cardiac death, it happens all of a sudden, and within 1 hour of your symptoms, patient collapses. And the mortality rate, even in hospital, in ICU, the survival rate is only 25%. And if outside hospital, if the patient does not get any support within 5 minutes, the mortality is more than 90%, is 90%. So that is where lies the problem. So sudden cardiac death has to be taken, where if it happens outside the hospital, you have to receive that help within 5 minutes. Otherwise, you lose the life. But regarding COVID, we all know COVID is a hypercoagulable state, where, as Dr. Tiku has already explained, patient has more coagulation tendency. Thrombotics episodes, they increase. And this we have seen in COVID stage 1, different stages of COVID.